A new year does not demand that you become a new person. It simply creates a pause, a brief opening where you can turn your attention inward and observe the mind you are already carrying. 2026 has begun, and with it arrive the same thoughts, habits, and inner patterns that quietly shape your days. This is not a failure. It is an invitation to see clearly. This reflection is not about forcing optimism, setting pressure-filled resolutions, or pretending that change happens overnight. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that lasting change does not begin by rearranging the outside world. It begins by understanding how the mind responds to experience. When the mind changes its way of meeting life, everything else follows naturally. What you will explore here is not a promise of instant transformation, but a path toward awareness. When attention becomes steady and honest, old patterns lose their hold, and new possibilities appear without effort. In this way, 2026 becomes meaningful not because time has moved forward, but because the mind has learned to meet each moment with clarity and ease. In Buddhism, the root of suffering is not found in events themselves, but in the way the mind interprets them. Situations arise constantly in life, some pleasant and some difficult, yet they do not carry meaning on their own. Meaning is added by the mind. Two people can encounter the same challenge and walk away with entirely different experiences, not because the situation was different, but because their inner responses were different. The mind is constantly interpreting, comparing, and judging. It decides whether something is seen as a problem, a threat, an opportunity, or something neutral. When the mind is restless or fearful, even small challenges feel overwhelming. When the mind is calm and clear, even serious difficulties can be met with stability. This is why changing external circumstances often brings only brief relief. A new job, a new relationship, or a new environment may feel refreshing at first, but if the mind has not changed, familiar reactions slowly return. Buddhism teaches that suffering repeats itself when the same mental patterns are carried into new situations. The outer form may change, but the inner habits remain. This is why people often find themselves facing similar frustrations again and again, even as life appears to move forward. The mind recreates its struggles unless it is understood. To change the mind does not mean denying reality or pretending that difficulties do not exist. It means recognizing when the mind is adding extra weight to experience. Resistance, worry, and expectation often amplify discomfort far beyond what the situation requires. When the mind relaxes its grip, experience becomes simpler. The facts of life remain, but the struggle around them softens. When the mind is tense, even comfort feels unstable. Pleasure is overshadowed by fear of loss, and peace is interrupted by anticipation of what might go wrong. When the mind is gentle and open, discomfort does not dominate awareness. It is felt, acknowledged, and allowed to pass without becoming overwhelming. This shift does not happen by controlling circumstances, but by understanding mental reactions as they arise. This year does not demand that life become perfect. It does not ask you to control outcomes or eliminate uncertainty. It invites you to observe how the mind meets each experience. When attention is placed on the quality of response rather than the situation itself, freedom begins to appear. The same life continues, but it is lived with less resistance and more clarity. Buddhism points out that peace is not dependent on having everything go your way. It depends on meeting whatever arises with awareness rather than struggle. When the mind stops arguing with reality, it becomes flexible. This flexibility allows you to adapt without losing balance. Over time, this understanding reshapes experience more deeply than any external change ever could. By seeing clearly that the mind matters more than circumstances, you take the first step toward lasting change. Instead of chasing better situations, you begin cultivating a wiser relationship with whatever appears. From this relationship calm, resilience, and clarity naturally grow. Much of what we call personality is not something consciously chosen. It is a collection of habits formed over time. The mind learns how to react early in life and repeats those reactions automatically. When something feels familiar, the mind follows a well-worn path without stopping to question it. In this way, reactions become routines, and routines slowly shape how life is experienced. These habits are not always obvious. They appear as familiar thoughts, emotional responses, and assumptions about how things will turn out. When disappointment arises, the mind reacts in the same way it always has. When success appears, it may trigger the same worries or fears of loss. Because these reactions feel familiar, they are often mistaken for who we are, rather than seen as learned patterns. This is why time alone does not create growth. Years can pass while the same inner responses repeat themselves. New situations arise, but the mind meets them with old habits. Without awareness, the future quietly mirrors the past. Circumstances change on the surface, yet the inner experience remains unchanged. This repetition can feel frustrating, especially when effort has been made to move forward. Buddhism explains that habits continue because they operate without being seen. The mind reacts faster than awareness can catch up. A thought appears, an emotion follows, and a reaction unfolds before there is any pause. Over time, this automatic process feels unavoidable. Yet, it is not permanent. It only continues because it has never been interrupted. Awareness is what breaks this cycle. When you begin to notice how the mind reacts, something important happens. There is a brief pause between stimulus and response. In that pause, the reaction loses its authority. The mind is no longer trapped in reflex. It becomes capable of observation rather than repetition. This space created by awareness is subtle but powerful. It does not demand that you immediately change anything. It simply allows you to see clearly. When a familiar reaction arises, you recognize it without following it completely. This recognition weakens the habit. Over time, patterns that once felt fixed begin to soften. Buddhism teaches that freedom begins with seeing. When the mind is observed without judgment, it gradually loosens its grip on old behaviors. Choice becomes possible, not because you force it, but because you are no longer unconscious of what is happening. Instead of reacting automatically, the mind gains the ability to respond intentionally. A new year becomes meaningful, not because the date has changed, but because awareness has entered where habit once ruled. 2026 does not become new through resolution or effort alone. It becomes new when the mind stops repeating itself without question. When awareness grows, repetition fades. Life begins to feel less predictable, not because circumstances improve, but because reactions are no longer fixed. The same situations may arise, but they are met differently. This difference is where real change begins. By understanding the habitual nature of the mind, patience develops. You realize that patterns were learned and can therefore be unlearned. Growth becomes a gradual process rather than a dramatic event. With steady awareness, the mind slowly frees itself from repetition and begins to meet each moment with freshness rather than habit. Changing the mind is often misunderstood as replacing negative thoughts with positive ones, or convincing oneself that everything is fine. Many approaches to self-improvement encourage constant optimism, as if discomfort were a personal failure. Buddhism offers a different understanding. It does not ask the mind to deny pain or cover it with hopeful language. It asks the mind to see clearly. Clarity, not positivity, is what brings peace. Life naturally includes difficulty. Loss, uncertainty, disappointment, and fear arise at different stages for everyone. Trying to eliminate these experiences or pretend they do not exist only creates tension. When the mind insists on positivity, it often pushes unpleasant experiences into the background where they continue to influence behavior unconsciously. Buddhism teaches that peace comes not from avoidance, but from honest awareness. When unpleasant thoughts arise, the practice is not to argue with them or replace them with better ones. Thoughts are mental events, not commands or truths. By observing a thought as it appears, you learn how it functions without becoming entangled in it. The mind becomes less reactive when it stops treating every thought as something that must be believed or fixed. Emotions follow a similar pattern. Fear, sadness, anger, and frustration arise as part of being human. Suppressing these emotions does not dissolve them. It only delays their expression. Buddhism encourages allowing emotions to be felt fully without being controlled by them. This allowance does not mean acting on emotion or identifying with it. It means giving it space to move through awareness naturally. A peaceful mind is not one that is free from struggle. It is one that no longer fights itself. When resistance ends, inner conflict softens. Pain may still be present, but suffering decreases. This distinction is important. Pain is part of life. Suffering is created when pain is resisted, judged, or misunderstood. Forcing positivity can create a sense of failure when difficult emotions persist. People may feel they are not practicing correctly or that something is wrong with them. Buddhism removes this pressure. It recognizes that struggle is not a flaw. It is an experience to be understood. When the mind meets struggle with curiosity rather than judgment, insight replaces frustration. Understanding unpleasant experiences requires patience. Some emotions and thoughts arise repeatedly because they are connected to deep habits or unresolved experiences. Buddhism does not promise quick relief. It encourages steady observation. Over time, patterns that once felt overwhelming begin to lose intensity, not because they are pushed away, but because they are no longer fed by resistance. Changing the mind also involves recognizing that clarity is not emotional numbness. Feeling deeply does not contradict peace. In fact, when emotions are allowed without interference, they often pass more gently. The mind learns to remain present without being consumed. This presence creates a sense of stability even during emotional difficulty. When the mind stops forcing positivity, authenticity returns. You no longer feel the need to perform calmness or happiness. Experience is met honestly, moment by moment. This honesty builds trust in your own awareness. You learn that you can face discomfort without collapsing, and you can enjoy pleasure without clinging. Buddhism teaches that transformation happens naturally when understanding deepens. There is no need to force the mind into a particular state. Awareness itself does the work. As understanding grows, reactions soften, and peace becomes more accessible. A changed mind is not one that never feels fear or sadness. It is one that recognizes these states without being controlled by them. It is a mind that allows experience to unfold without adding unnecessary struggle. In this way, changing the mind becomes less about becoming different and more about seeing clearly. When clarity replaces resistance, peace follows quietly. The mind no longer needs to pretend. It simply understands. A fresh beginning does not come from changing circumstances alone. It comes from releasing the ideas through which those circumstances are interpreted. Many people experience suffering not because of what is happening in the present, but because they are still responding through conclusions formed long ago. Past disappointments, fixed self-images, and long-held judgments quietly shape perception, often without being noticed. An old view can be a belief about who you are, what life allows, or what you deserve. It may sound like an inner voice that says, "You always fail," that change is difficult, or that certain outcomes are impossible. These views often feel true because they have been repeated for years. Yet Buddhism teaches that views are not facts. They are mental constructions formed through experience, memory, and emotion. When a view becomes fixed, it limits perception. New experiences are filtered through old conclusions, and growth becomes difficult. The mind stops seeing what is actually present, and instead reacts to what it expects. In this way, the past quietly governs the present. The world may change, but the experience of it remains confined. Letting go of old views does not require rejecting your past or denying what you have experienced. It requires recognizing that conclusions formed in one context may no longer serve you now. Life evolves, and understanding must evolve with it. When the mind clings to outdated views, it resists learning. When it loosens its grip, curiosity returns. Buddhism describes views as lenses through which reality is seen. A lens shapes what is visible, but it is not the reality itself. When you realize that a view is a lens rather than a truth, its power weakens. You no longer need to defend it or obey it. You can examine it with awareness. Flexibility of mind arises when views are held lightly. A flexible mind is open to correction, growth, and discovery. It does not collapse when challenged, nor does it cling to certainty for security. This flexibility allows learning to occur naturally. Each experience becomes an opportunity to understand, rather than a test to pass or fail. Old self-judgments are among the most limiting views. Labels such as successful, weak, capable, or unworthy shape how experiences are interpreted. When these labels go unexamined, they influence behavior and expectation. Buddhism encourages observing these judgments without identification. When you see them as mental events rather than truths, their hold begins to dissolve. Letting go of rigid thinking also softens emotional reactions. When the mind is no longer committed to defending a fixed position, it becomes less reactive. Curiosity replaces defensiveness. Understanding replaces blame. This shift does not remove challenge from life, but it changes how challenge is met. Renewal arises naturally from this openness. When old views are released, new possibilities appear without effort. The mind becomes capable of seeing options that were previously invisible. Growth is no longer forced. It unfolds as understanding deepens. A fresh beginning, then, is not about becoming someone new. It is about removing the limitations created by old thinking. When rigid views are loosened, the mind returns to a state of learning. From this state, clarity emerges, and change becomes possible. In Buddhism, freedom is closely linked to understanding. As understanding grows, attachment to views decreases. When the mind is no longer bound by fixed conclusions, it becomes free to meet life as it is, rather than as it was once believed to be. This freedom is the foundation of true renewal. Changing the mind is not something that happens all at once. It is not a single decision made at the beginning of the year, nor is it the result of a powerful emotional moment. Buddhism teaches that the mind is shaped gradually through repetition and consistency. Just as habits were formed over time, they are also softened and reshaped through steady daily awareness. Many people wait for motivation or inspiration to change. Yet the mind does not transform through intensity alone. It changes through attention. Small moments of awareness, practiced regularly, have a deeper effect than dramatic resolutions that fade quickly. Training the mind is less about doing more and more about noticing what is already happening. One of the simplest forms of awareness is noticing a reaction before it turns into action. This may happen when irritation begins to rise, when impatience appears, or when the urge to speak or withdraw arises. Awareness creates a pause. In that pause, the reaction is no longer automatic. The mind gains space to observe rather than immediately respond. This small pause changes the direction of experience. Pausing before responding is another essential practice. Most conflict and regret arise not from what we feel, but from how quickly we act on it. When the mind slows down, responses become more thoughtful and less reactive. Buddhism does not ask for silence or passivity. It asks for presence. When presence guides action, behavior becomes aligned with clarity rather than impulse. Returning to the breath is a foundational way to anchor awareness. The breath is always available and does not require effort to control. When the mind becomes restless, distracted, or overwhelmed, gently noticing the breath brings attention back to the present moment. This return is not an escape from experience. It is a way of stabilizing attention so experience can be met clearly. These practices may seem simple, but their power lies in repetition. Training the mind works much like training the body. Small, consistent movements build strength over time. In the same way, small moments of awareness reshape mental habits. Each time attention returns to the present, old patterns weaken slightly and clarity strengthens. Daily awareness does not require special conditions. It can be practiced while walking, eating, speaking, or listening. Awareness is not limited to formal practice. It is a way of relating to everyday life. When the mind notices tension in the body, it relaxes naturally. When it notices distraction, it gently returns. Nothing is forced. These quiet practices do not seek recognition. They are often invisible to others and unremarkable on the surface. Yet their effect is deep and lasting. Buddhism reminds us that what is trained consistently becomes natural. Over time, awareness no longer feels like an effort. It becomes the mind's default way of meeting experience. As awareness strengthens, calm begins to replace tension. This calm is not the absence of activity, but the absence of inner struggle. Clarity replaces confusion because the mind sees more accurately what is happening. Presence replaces distraction because attention is no longer scattered across worry and anticipation. Training the mind also builds patience. Change becomes less about achieving a goal and more about showing up consistently. There is no pressure to be perfect. Each moment of awareness is complete in itself. Missed moments are not failures. They are reminders to begin again. Buddhism emphasizes that transformation happens quietly. There may be no clear moment when the mind suddenly feels different. Instead, there is a gradual shift. Reactions soften, restlessness decreases, understanding deepens. Life begins to feel more spacious, even though circumstances remain the same. Daily awareness changes how the mind relates to difficulty. Challenges are met with steadiness rather than urgency. Emotions are felt without being overwhelming. Thoughts are noticed without being followed endlessly. This does not remove difficulty, but it removes unnecessary suffering. Training the mind through daily awareness is an act of care. It is choosing presence over habit, clarity over confusion, and patience over force. Each small moment of attention contributes to this training. Gradually, what once required effort becomes natural. Calm, clarity, and presence arise, not because they were demanded, but because the mind was gently and consistently guided back to itself. Daily awareness becomes the foundation of real change. It reshapes the mind from within, not through pressure, but through understanding. A fresh beginning is often imagined as something dramatic. People expect clear signs, visible changes, or a sudden sense of renewal that announces itself loudly. Buddhism offers a quieter understanding. A true fresh beginning does not usually stand out from the outside. It unfolds inwardly, in subtle but meaningful ways. It shows itself as less resistance, less inner conflict, and a gentler relationship with experience. One of the first signs of a fresh beginning is reduced resistance. Resistance appears when the mind argues with what is happening, wishing reality were different. When resistance softens, the mind stops exhausting itself by pushing against life. Situations may still be challenging, but they are no longer met with constant inner struggle. Energy that was once spent fighting reality becomes available for clarity and calm. Another sign is a decrease in self-judgment. The mind no longer constantly evaluates itself as successful or failing, worthy or unworthy. Instead of harsh inner commentary, there is curiosity and understanding. Mistakes are seen as information rather than evidence of personal failure. This shift creates emotional relief and allows growth without pressure. A fresh beginning also brings less urgency to control outcomes. The mind begins to recognize the limits of control and stops demanding certainty. Planning still happens, but without anxiety. Effort is applied without desperation. When control loosens, trust grows. Trust does not mean passivity. It means acting wisely without clinging to specific results. As resistance and judgment fade, patience naturally increases. The mind becomes willing to allow processes to unfold at their own pace. There is less rushing and fewer demands for immediate resolution. Patience does not remove discomfort, but it prevents discomfort from becoming overwhelming. It allows the mind to remain present, even when answers are not yet clear. Observation becomes clearer as well. Instead of reacting instantly, the mind watches. It notices thoughts as they arise, emotions as they shift, and sensations as they pass. This observation creates space. In that space, reactions lose their intensity. The mind no longer feels compelled to act on every impulse. Reactivity decreases as awareness grows. Situations that once triggered strong emotional responses begin to feel manageable. This does not mean emotions disappear. It means they no longer dominate behavior. Anger, fear, and sadness may still arise, but they are met with steadiness rather than panic or avoidance. A fresh beginning does not mean life becomes free of difficulty. Challenges still arise. Loss still happens. Uncertainty remains part of existence. The difference lies in how these experiences are met. The mind becomes steady enough to face life without collapsing under its weight. This steadiness is not rigidity, it is balance. This balance allows joy to be experienced without clinging. Pleasant moments are enjoyed fully without fear of losing them. Gratitude replaces anxiety. Appreciation replaces attachment. Joy becomes lighter and more sustainable because it is not burdened by the need to last forever. The same balance allows difficulty to be experienced without collapse. Pain is acknowledged without being resisted or exaggerated. The mind does not spiral into hopelessness or self-blame. Instead, it remains present, allowing difficulty to pass through without becoming an identity. Freedom, in this sense, is not the absence of problems, it is the absence of inner imprisonment. The mind is no longer trapped by constant reaction, judgment, or control. It is free to meet each moment freshly, without carrying excessive weight from the past or fear of the future. A fresh beginning looks like simplicity. It looks like fewer inner battles and more quiet understanding. It looks like choosing presence over habit and awareness over impulse. From the outside, nothing dramatic may appear to have changed. From the inside, everything feels lighter. This is the kind of beginning Buddhism points toward. Not a reinvention of the self, but a release of what no longer needs to be carried. When resistance softens and steadiness grows, life is met as it is. In that meeting, freedom naturally arises. Allow yourself to notice what has already shifted. A fresh beginning is not something you wait for or announce. It is something you recognize in the way the mind settles, in the way reactions soften, and in the way life is met with greater ease. Nothing dramatic needs to happen for change to be real. The year moves forward on its own, but the mind learns to move differently. When awareness replaces habit and understanding replaces resistance, each moment becomes an opportunity to begin again. This beginning is quiet, steady, and deeply personal. Carry this understanding gently into your days. Let patience guide your actions, let clarity shape your responses, and let presence become your foundation. When the mind is trained to meet life as it is, every step forward becomes a fresh beginning.